Gentlemen, have you ever wondered why sometimes a woman can completely capture your mind without raising her voice, without making demands, without even asking for anything directly? It feels as if she has a silent power over you, guiding your thoughts, shaping your choices, and pulling you closer, even when you try to resist. This isn't magic, it's psychology. Women, often without realizing it, use secret weapons, subtle emotional and psychological tricks that can influence men more strongly than logic, more strongly than reason, sometimes even more strongly than love itself. These weapons don't look dangerous on the surface. They appear as affection, admiration, silence, or mystery. Yet behind them lies a force that can bend a man's emotions, change his behavior, and even control his decisions without him ever noticing. And that's exactly what we're going to uncover today. In this video, you'll discover the 5 most powerful secret psychological weapons women use to control men. Some of these will surprise you, some will make you uncomfortable, and some you may recognize from your own life. But once you see them clearly, you'll never be the same again. So watch carefully, because understanding these hidden weapons could be the key to finally breaking free from invisible control and reclaiming your own power. Point 1. The power of emotional validation. When we talk about the secret psychological weapons women use, emotional validation stands at the very top. This is one of the most subtle yet powerful tools, because it doesn't feel like control. It feels like love. And that's what makes it so effective. From a very young age, men are conditioned by society to believe that showing emotions is a sign of weakness. Boys are told things like, "Man up," "Don't cry," or "Be tough." Over time, many men learn to bury their true feelings, carrying silent battles inside their minds. Yet, beneath that mask of strength, there remains a deep human need, the need to be seen, heard, and emotionally understood. This is exactly where women step in with their weapon of validation. When a woman listens with genuine interest, when she nods at the right time, when her eyes say, "I feel you," she is unlocking a door inside the man that very few people have access to. And when she goes further and says things like, "I'm proud of you," or "I know how hard you've been working," she becomes a source of healing that the man didn't even realize he was craving. For him, it feels like finding an oasis in the desert. But here's where the psychology gets fascinating. Once a man starts associating his emotional safety with one woman, he becomes emotionally dependent on her validation. Her approval becomes his inner compass. If she is proud, he feels strong. If she is disappointed, he feels broken. This dependency can grow so strong that it influences his decisions, his behavior, even his long-term goals. Now imagine the power this gives her. By selectively offering or withholding validation, she can subtly guide his actions. For example, if she praises him when he chooses her way and grows distant when he resists, his subconscious mind learns to adjust in order to keep receiving her emotional rewards. This is similar to how positive reinforcement works in psychology. It trains behavior without force, without arguments, without visible pressure. To make this even more powerful, women often combine validation with physical gestures. A gentle touch on his arm while saying, "I believe in you," has 10 times the effect of just the words. The combination of verbal and non-verbal cues makes the man feel completely accepted, almost like a hero in her eyes. And once a man feels like a hero to a woman, he will do anything to keep that feeling alive. Emotional validation gives women silent power over men. It's not manipulation in the negative sense. It can be loving and nurturing, but when used strategically, it becomes a weapon of influence, because men will fight battles, change careers, or even compromise their own values just to keep that source of emotional nourishment flowing. This is why emotional validation is not just a sweet gesture, it is a powerful psychological weapon. It works because it targets the very need men rarely admit, the need to be understood, appreciated, and emotionally safe. And once a woman becomes the only person meeting that need, she holds the invisible strings that guide his heart and mind. Point 2. The silent weapon of mystery. If emotional validation pulls a man closer, then mystery keeps him hooked. It's one of the most subtle yet irresistible weapons women use, often without even realizing how powerful it is. Mystery works because it taps into one of men's strongest instincts, the need to chase, to conquer, and to solve puzzles. Men are natural problem solvers. They love challenges, games, and competitions. When something is too easy, it quickly loses its appeal. The same psychology applies in relationships. If a woman reveals everything about herself too quickly, her feelings, her routine, her weaknesses, the man's brain subconsciously thinks, the game is already won. But when a woman holds back just enough, when she keeps a part of herself hidden, she triggers a man's curiosity. That curiosity becomes a driving force that keeps him thinking about her long after she's gone. This is tied to what psychologists call the reward uncertainty principle. Studies show that people get a stronger dopamine rush when rewards are unpredictable. For example, gamblers keep pulling slot machines because they never know when the jackpot will hit. The unpredictability itself becomes addictive. Similarly, when a woman is mysterious, sometimes available, sometimes distant, sometimes expressive, sometimes quiet, she creates uncertainty. The man never quite knows where he stands, and this uncertainty releases dopamine, making him crave her attention even more. Consider a simple example. If she doesn't always reply instantly to his messages, he begins to wonder, is she busy? Is she losing interest? Or is she testing me? His mind fills with questions, and instead of feeling secure, he feels challenged. And because men hate to lose, he invests more effort, texting more, planning better dates, or working harder to impress her. The woman, without saying a word, has already put herself in a position of control. Mystery also creates perceived value. Think about diamonds. Why are they so valuable? Not just because they're beautiful, but because they're rare. When a woman doesn't give away her full self too quickly, she sends the subconscious message, I am rare. Not everyone gets access to me. That rarity makes her appear more precious in the man's eyes. He feels lucky just to have a piece of her attention. What makes mystery even more powerful is that it activates the male ego. Men want to be the ones who unlock a woman's secrets, who discover the side of her that no one else has seen. This gives them a sense of victory and pride. A woman who understands this keeps just enough distance to spark curiosity, while giving just enough access to keep the man engaged. But here's the genius of it. Mystery doesn't have to mean playing games. It can simply mean having a life outside the relationship, goals, hobbies, passions, and secrets that are hers alone. When a woman is not 100% predictable, when she has her own depth and individuality. A man realizes he can never fully own her, and that thought keeps him chasing, sometimes for years. In essence, mystery is the fuel of desire. It keeps men restless, curious, and endlessly engaged. It's not about manipulation, it's about maintaining intrigue. And once a man falls into the trap of trying to figure her out, the woman quietly gains the upper hand, because she becomes the riddle he can never stop trying to solve. Point 3. The use of physical affection and withdrawal. If mystery keeps a man chasing, then physical affection binds him emotionally to the chase. Touch is not just physical, it is deeply psychological. Human beings are wired to connect through physical closeness. In fact, studies in neuroscience show that even a gentle touch can release oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. This chemical creates feelings of trust, attachment, and emotional warmth. Women instinctively know this, and they often use physical affection as one of their most powerful weapons. For men, physical affection carries a special weight. Society often tells men to be strong, independent, and unemotional. Many men grow up receiving very little nurturing touch. So, when a woman touches him, whether it's holding his hand, resting her head on his shoulder, or giving him a warm hug, he feels something he rarely experiences: acceptance without judgment. That moment of closeness tells him, "You're safe, you're wanted, you're enough." It's not just physical, it's a validation of his very existence. But here's where the real power lies. Physical affection doesn't only connect, it can also control. When a woman gives affection generously, the man feels rewarded. But when she withdraws it, whether consciously or unconsciously, he feels a sudden emptiness, almost like a withdrawal from an addiction. His mind begins to panic. Did I do something wrong? Did I lose her love? How do I fix this? This dynamic is closely tied to attachment theory. Psychologists explain that people bond most strongly when closeness is inconsistent, sometimes present, sometimes absent. This inconsistency creates what's called anxious attachment. The man feels a roller coaster of emotions: high joy when affection is given, deep insecurity when it's withheld. Ironically, it is this very inconsistency that makes the attachment stronger. Just like a gambler hooked on unpredictable wins, the man becomes addicted to the emotional highs of receiving her affection. Consider an example. Imagine a man who upsets his partner. Instead of yelling, she simply withdraws affection. No hugs, no kisses, no warmth. Days pass, and he begins to feel not just rejected, but almost invisible. To fix this, he goes out of his way, buying gifts, apologizing, adjusting his behavior, just to earn back that touch. Without realizing it, he has shifted his actions to meet her silent conditions. This is control at its most subtle. On the flip side, when used positively, physical affection can make a man stronger, more confident, and deeply loyal. A kiss before a big meeting, a reassuring touch during his struggles, or a gentle hug after failure can turn a man into a warrior who feels invincible. This is why soldiers, leaders, and great achievers often credit the women in their lives for their success. It's not just words, but the silent power of touch that fuels them. So here's the paradox. Physical affection is both comfort and control. It heals, it bonds, but it can also bend a man's will. When a woman understands this balance, when to give, when to hold back, she gains silent influence over his emotions, his actions, and even his identity. He may think he's acting out of choice, but in reality, much of his behavior is guided by the invisible memory of her touch or the painful absence of it. That is why physical affection isn't just intimacy. It's a psychological weapon, subtle yet immensely powerful. Point 4. The influence of subtle guilt. Among all the psychological weapons women can use, guilt is perhaps the most underestimated yet deeply effective one. Unlike direct arguments or demands, guilt works quietly. It doesn't force a man to change. It makes him want to change, because his conscience pushes him to do so. And once a man feels guilty, he often bends over backward just to restore balance. Why is guilt so powerful? To understand this, we need to look at male psychology. Deep inside, many men carry a natural desire to be protectors, providers, and sources of happiness for the women they love. They feel responsible for their partner's well-being. So, when a woman expresses disappointment or sadness, directly or indirectly, the man interprets it as his personal failure. His protective instinct kicks in, and he feels compelled to fix the situation. Here's where women use this instinct, often without even realizing it. A simple phrase like, "I thought you cared about me," or "If you really loved me, you would have remembered," can hit harder than hours of arguments. It makes the man question his love, his commitment, even his masculinity. The guilt doesn't just make him regret, it makes him act. He may change his behavior, buy gifts, plan surprises, or even compromise his values, all in an attempt to erase the uncomfortable feeling of guilt. But guilt isn't always delivered in words. Sometimes silence speaks louder. The silent treatment is one of the oldest and most effective guilt-inducing tactics. When a woman withdraws, avoids eye contact, or grows unusually quiet, the man immediately senses that something so. Unlike women, most men are not trained to navigate emotional complexity. Silence makes them restless. They begin replaying every detail in their mind. What did I say wrong? Did I forget something important? Did I hurt her somehow? That unease builds up until they finally surrender, offering apologies or compromises just to break the tension. Psychologists call this emotional leverage. It works like a seesaw. The woman expresses, or withholds, emotion, and the man, desperate to restore harmony, shifts his actions to rebalance the relationship. Over time, this can become a pattern. The man learns that whenever guilt appears, the only way to escape it is to give in. He doesn't even realize he's being trained. He just thinks he's being a good partner. Of course, guilt doesn't have to be destructive. Used gently, it can guide men toward growth, responsibility, and deeper emotional awareness. For example, a woman might express disappointment not to manipulate, but to encourage maturity in her partner. Yet, when used strategically, guilt becomes a silent leash, a way to control without force, to command without shouting. In truth, guilt is powerful because it turns love into responsibility. A man who feels guilty doesn't just think he failed his partner. He feels like he failed himself, and in trying to heal her disappointment, he hands her the power to shape his behavior. That is why subtle guilt stands as one of the most effective psychological tricks. It requires no shouting, no arguments, no ultimatums. Just a look, a pause, or a carefully chosen phrase is enough to guide a man's heart and actions, often more effectively than any direct demand ever could. Point 5. The power of admiration and respect. If guilt makes a man correct his actions, then admiration makes him amplify them. Among all the psychological weapons women use, this one is perhaps the most uplifting and, at the same time, the most controlling. Why? Because admiration doesn't just affect what a man does. It shapes who he believes he is. At his core, every man carries a deep need to feel respected. In fact, countless studies have shown that for many men, respect is even more important than love. A man can live without constant affection, but to live without respect feels like death to his spirit. Women who understand this secret weapon use it with precision, sometimes gently, sometimes strategically, to hold enormous influence over a man's choices, confidence, and sense of self. Imagine this scenario. A man works late into the night, struggling with a project. He's exhausted, unsure of himself. Then his partner says softly, "I believe in you. You're so smart, you always figure things out." Suddenly his fatigue fades. He feels like a warrior again, ready to conquer the challenge. Why? Because her admiration touched his core identity. In that moment, he doesn't just want to succeed, he needs to succeed, because her respect depends on it. This is where admiration transforms into control. A woman doesn't have to demand or argue. She can simply use selective admiration to shape his actions. When she praises him for behaviors she values, such as ambition, kindness, or loyalty, he naturally repeats them. When she withholds admiration or shows disappointment, he feels like his very masculinity has been questioned. To restore that respect, he adapts. Without realizing it, he's being guided, not by force, but by his hunger for recognition. This works because admiration is not just external, it becomes internal. Over time, a man starts to see himself through a woman's eyes. If she constantly uplifts him, he believes he is capable and worthy. If she criticizes or withdraws respect, he begins to doubt himself. That psychological dependency makes admiration one of the most powerful weapons women can wield. But there's more. Admiration doesn't just motivate, it can make a man loyal beyond reason. When a woman makes him feel like a hero, he naturally associates his worth with her presence. She becomes the mirror in which he sees his best self. And once a man ties his identity to a woman's admiration, losing her feels like losing himself. This is why some men stay in relationships long past their happiness, because they cannot let go of the one person who makes them feel significant. Of course, admiration can also be deeply positive. Used with sincerity, it can inspire men to grow, to dream bigger, to reach levels they never thought possible. Many successful men throughout history credit the women in their lives for giving them the respect and encouragement that fueled their greatness. But when used deliberately as a tool, admiration becomes more than love. It becomes leverage. In the end, admiration and respect are invisible strings. A man may feel like he's acting out of his own strength, but often he is dancing to the rhythm of the respect he craves. A woman who understands this doesn't need to raise her voice or demand change. With a few words of praise, or the silence of withheld admiration, she can guide his actions, shape his identity, and hold a level of influence stronger than any command. That is why admiration is not just kindness. It is one of the most powerful psychological weapons women use to control men. So, my friends, we've now uncovered the 5 secret psychological weapons women use to control men: emotional validation, mystery, physical affection, guilt, and admiration. Each of these tools works on the deepest layers of male psychology, often without the man even realizing it. Some of these strategies can feel like love, others like subtle pressure, but together they create a powerful influence that shapes men's actions, decisions, and even identities. But here's the real question. Now that you know these weapons exist, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you allow yourself to be unconsciously guided by them, or will you step back, recognize the patterns, and respond with awareness? Remember, knowledge is power, and the more aware you are, the less vulnerable you become to invisible strings pulling at your emotions. At the same time, this is not about blaming women or labeling these behaviors as manipulation. Many of these actions come naturally, without conscious intent. The true value of this discussion is to understand the game that's being played beneath the surface, so that you can engage in relationships with clarity, strength, and confidence. Gentlemen, control only works when you're unaware of it. Once you see it, the spell begins to break. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced one of these psychological weapons in your own life? Which one struck you the most? Share your story in the comments. It might open someone else's eyes too. If this video gave you insights you've never thought about before, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because we'll be diving even deeper into the hidden truths of psychology, relationships, and human behavior. And remember, the strongest man is not the one who avoids control. It's the one who understands it and chooses his own path.